Everyone, I am Jillian Murphy. I am a naturopath and an emotional eating and body image coach. And I'm here today because I promised that I would talk about the 5 biggest myths of diet culture. And I mean, let's be honest, there are many diet culture myths that I don't enjoy. But I sort of picked out 5 that I think are the most fundamental, kind of like the foundation, the beginning places where we need to start. And I thought I would dig into those. At the moment, quite honestly, I'm promoting the Food Freedom Body Love Method group program, which is happening in Kingston starting on October 2nd. It's 8 weeks, Monday nights, 7:30 to 9 p.m. Totally revolutionary in terms of if you are looking to change your relationship with food and your body, if you are fighting food and fighting your body regularly, the program will make some incredibly big shifts for you in only 2 months. And so if you're interested in that, I'll put some links to this, when we're done. I'll put some links below it. And also I'm always taking on one-on-one clients. It kind of depends month to month how much space I have available. Going into October, I have a couple of spots free. So if you're not in Kingston, you don't need to be in Kingston. I do work with women, and the one-on-one, the difference is mostly, we work together for 4 to 6 months instead of just 2 months. And, it's individualized a little bit more. And, we dig really deeply into individual stuck places for women. So a lot of women find that very helpful to really dig into their issues. But I wanted to touch base, or I wanted to talk about the 5 biggest myths of diet culture, because I think that it's a good starting point for women who are like, what is this Food Freedom Body Love Method? And like, if I sign up and I invest my time and I invest my money in this place, what am I actually going to get out of it? And so I think that this is, a good place to start in terms of understanding where I come from and how I work very, very differently from traditional weight loss, body love, clean eating, programs that are basically out there. So let's just get right into it. So 5 biggest myths, again, there are many. I picked 5 that I want to talk about of diet culture. The first one is, number 1, you can know your healthiest ideal weight. So this is a really big one. And this is a really, heavily encouraged in the medical system myth, that you can know what your healthiest ideal weight is and that you should be ultimately striving for it all the time. And so typically, how do we figure that out? We tend to use in the mainstream culture, we use calculations like BMI, right? We're a certain weight, we're a certain height, and based on how tall we are, we should be able to predict within a very tight range where our healthiest weight is. And for most of the women I work with, they are hanging on to a belief system about what their healthiest ideal weight is. And we'll talk in a little while about why that can be a bit of a negative thing. But the fact of the matter is, you can't really know that. Right? Like, that's actually a made up thing that nobody ever questions. It's like, I'm 5'4", and I know many other women who are 5'4", and we all have different skin colors and different skin textures. We have different hair. Our hair grows differently. We have different shoe sizes. And yet, it's completely accepted that our thinness or our slenderness level should be basically the same across the board. It's never really questioned, right? We should all be the same level of thin. And it's just kind of crazy making. Like, it's like, that doesn't make any sense. As humans, we're genetically diverse in almost every possible way. Of course, when it comes to weight and our bodies, our weight is going to be genetically diverse. And yet, it's just never questioned or never thought of, right? So one of the things I often get women to do when we're in the program, a little thought experiment, is to think about, and you could never do this, but think about an experiment where you took 100 babies and you fed them all the exact same amount of food and you would exercise them exactly the same way. When they're 15 or 20 or 25, would you expect all of those babies to be the exact same height if you could control for all the variables? No, you would not expect. We easily understand genetic differences in height and genetic variability in height, and yet we do not accept the same thing in our culture when it comes to weight. But it is true that weights are genetically diverse and they cannot just be predicted based on height. So the first myth, and why that's important or why that's valid, we'll get into it in a minute. But the first thing I want you to understand is that your healthiest, most ideal weight is the weight that you are at when you are living a flexible, healthy lifestyle that makes you feel energetic and is sustainable and that you actually enjoy living. Imagine that. It's healthy, you feel healthy, it's flexible, you're not in crazy negative patterns with food or your body or thinking repetitively about food or pre-planning food. You're just living and you feel good and you feel energetic, and wherever your weight falls, when you are doing that, that is your healthiest, best weight. The problem is that it's so difficult to actually allow yourself to go there, right? Like, so the next question for most women is like, well, how do I even do that? That's what the program is all about. But please understand that buying into the idea that you can predict and a medical doctor or an expert could prescribe what your best, healthiest, ideal weight is based on a calculation or a number is the foundation for developing food problems, which again, we'll get into in a minute. Myth number 2, that not only should you know and be able to predict exactly what your healthiest, best weight is, or within a small range, that you ultimately, as an individual, are 100% in control of your weight. Huge myth. Nobody ever questions it. We don't question this, right? We just accept it. We're in control of our weight. If we're overweight, it's our problem, it's our fault. But I want you to I just want to plant the seed, plant the idea that the way that our body uses food, the way that we actually burn food, and the way that we pull, or the way that we come up with when we're exercising, the way that we pull energy from our body to use for exercise or movement is highly variable. The thermodynamics in our body are highly variable, meaning we are not always in control. It is a biological fact that if you developed a food and exercise plan and you gave it to a very large group of people and they all adhered to it, same food, same calories, same food group, same exercise, you would have huge differences. Some people would lose weight potentially, some people would stay the same, and some people would actually gain weight on the exact same food and eating plan. It's a biological fact. And, there have been big studies done on adopted children when they're grown up. There have been studies done on identical twins, numerous studies that have shown that, New England Journal of Medicine published a study where they looked at 540, I believe, adults who were adopted in the first year of their life. And as adults, those adoptees had very similar sizes to their biological parents, and their size was in no way related to their adopted parents. That's huge. That's really, really interesting when we live in a culture that says you and every single action you take and every single time you exercise or don't exercise or eat the thing or don't eat the thing, you're the one in charge of your weight. The study is saying the opposite. Same when they studied identical twins. When they looked at the BMIs of identical twins, whether they were raised together or raised apart, the BMIs were incredibly similar, like very, very, very similar. Studies went even further to look at identical twins, and there were studies done where identical male twins as adults were put on different types of diets. And at the same time that they were put on different types of diets, one of the twins was running an average of 30 miles more than the other twin every week while they were doing the diet manipulation. And what did they find at the end of the study? Their weights were basically the same. It didn't even matter what dietary shifts they made, and it didn't matter that one twin was running an average of 30 miles more than the other twin every week. At the end, the weights were negligible in terms of differences, totally negligible. And they contrasted that against a study where they did the same thing, but with a bunch of men who weren't related, and the shifts in weight were all over the place. So identical twins, the weight shifting was almost exactly the same, and adult twins who weren't related, huge differences in, some didn't lose any weight, some lost tons of weight, some were somewhere in the middle. Okay, so this idea that you should be able to predict your weight and know exactly what your healthy weight is, and you can have that number in your mind and you should be always striving for it, is false, especially if you have to go to extremes that are unhealthy and unproductive for you in order to maintain it. And the second thing is that you actually can do that. Like, you're actually in control of your weight all the time. You know, what we're seeing in the research is that there is a huge genetic component to where our weight wants to go, to how we want to take food into our body and either store it or use it right away, or when we're exercising, how we actually burn fuel. Huge differences. And moving on from that, the third myth that I want to talk about is, you know, where it starts to become actually problematic is when the culture then gives us tools, right? The culture is not only saying, here's exactly where your weight should be, here's the level of slenderness that you should be at, regardless of your genetics. You should be controlling it no matter what. You're in control as an individual. But also, here are the tools to exert such control. And what are the tools that the culture gives us? The culture gives us food, manipulation, control, restriction, and it gives us exercise, manipulation, control, and punishment, basically. And so the problem here, the real problem, is that despite the fact that the culture continues to give us these same tools over and over and over and over and over again, the research shows over and over and over and over and over again that 95% of weight loss attempts via food restriction, food control, food group control, and excessive exercise fail. 95% fail. 5% of people might benefit from this, maybe, but it's like, you know, trying to win the lottery, basically, you know? And not only do 95% of these attempts fail, but there's actually, what I see in women, what I actually work with, is the whole cascade of negative behaviors that actually start to take place when we engage in this behavior. When we believe that we should be controlling our weight and our body all the time, and we start to use food and exercise in an inflexible, rigid, restrictive way to do it, what we start to see is that our body's internal thermostat, the way that we naturally control our weight, gets broken, and we start to see weight actually going up and it becoming more and more difficult for our body to do the natural job of maintaining a healthy weight. And number two, we start to see incredibly negative behaviors around food, like binge eating, which for any women who've been following me for a while know that binge eating, from my perspective, is a direct reaction to trying to control and restrict our food. It only happens when we are in restriction mode. Any kind of compulsive, negative behaviors around food tend to be triggered by this restriction, including emotional eating, which, again, if you followed me for a while, you know that I consider emotional eating a fairly normal part of the eating experience. I think that everyone does this. I know studies have been done that have shown that normal eaters eat emotionally as well, right? It's a normal, actually not that big of a deal coping mechanism, but it grows and it can become pathological when we are in restriction. So all of our negative behaviors around food tend to come from this really misguided belief that we have a certain weight we should be trying to attain, that we are the ones that should be in control of it, and we should be using food and exercise in a negative way. Exercise, you know, the same thing. So many women that I work with have terrible relationships with exercise. You know, they hate exercise. They don't want to move. But it's just that they don't want to move within the terms that we've been given, right? They don't want to run X amount of minutes at X heart rate so many days a week. They don't want to follow prescriptive rules. Every human body likes to move. We all love to move. We just don't love to be given rules and restrictions and punishing plans that don't feel good to us. And then we convince ourselves that we don't like exercise, that we're not sporty, that we're not athletic. You know, you don't need to be athletic to enjoy movement. We're humans, right? We like to move. But exercise, you know, in the same way that we develop really negative behaviors around food, when we get into these patterns of control and trying to control the inherently uncontrollable, the same thing happens with exercise. When we try to force our bodies into these negative places, our bodies don't like it, and our bodies start to revolt and shut down. And biology is a hard thing to overcome, right? So that's the third myth, that we should be using food and exercise. Not only, and I don't even care, like, even if you ignore all the other myths, even if you're like, yeah, whatever, I think I should be controlling my weight. My doctor says I've got to get it down. There's a million different reasons why I should be losing weight and I should be trying to control it. 95% of the time, if you're using food and exercise in a restrictive way to try and do that, it's going to fail. So the point's moot. Like, it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter if your doctor says your heart specialist says you have to get your weight down. 95% of the time, if you approach it in this way, it will fail. So it just doesn't even matter what all your reasoning is for why you have to get your weight down. If you approach it in this way, chances are it's not going to go very well. So that's the third one. The fourth one is along the same lines in terms of, that diets don't work. And the fourth myth is that maintenance is easy. I often, I was thinking a few months ago about what I used to believe when I used to engage in these kind of patterns. And again, I would never have called anything that I was doing a diet, just to be clear. I always said it was for health. It was like cleaning up my eating, tightening things up to be healthier, detoxing, whatever. But really, ultimately, I was equating thinness with health. And so I was trying to get thin under the guise of health. So I just want to clear that up, because some people are like, no, I don't diet, but really they're always manipulating their food in some way. So, the idea that, when I used to engage in these, it was like, what was I thinking? If I was going on one of these plans, what did I think would happen? Like, did I think I was going to stay on the juice fast forever? No. Like, in the cultural understanding of weight, and weight maintenance, we still really adhere to this sort of like thermodynamic, being really straightforward math, calories in, calories out. And I believe that the underlying thought process was I would just work really hard to get there, right? The sacrifice and the restriction and the dedication and the willpower, and I would get to the weight that I wanted to be at. And then as long as I wasn't overdoing it, as long as I kept exercising and I wasn't overeating, I wouldn't gain weight. So I could just stay there. But maintenance is the myth, right? It's like tons of women will say, yeah, but Weight Watchers did work for me. So that diet plan did work for me. And I'll say, well, did you gain the weight back? Well, yeah, I did. Okay. So then that's part of the diet cycle, not just the restriction, but actually when you can no longer for, 100 different reasons, continue to stick with that point counting or restriction. There's a million different reasons why we don't stick with that. Mental, emotional, physiological reasons that we don't stick with something that is not inherently flexible, enjoyable, sustainable for us. There's lots of reasons why we don't stick with. And then things fall apart and we gain the weight back and we blame ourselves. Yeah, but if I could have stuck with it, if I could have kept going, then it would work. Ifs are hypothetical. They don't exist. Ifs don't exist, right? What exists is what's actually happening for you in your body. And if you are seeing a continued cycle of trying to get control of things and it sort of working and then it falling apart, if you're seeing that cycle happen over and over again, and if I'm telling you that for 95% of women, this is the reality of what their experience is, then maybe we have to stop thinking that we're failing at the diet plans and start thinking that maybe the diet plans are failing us. This is not one person failing. This is an entire culture of women who are failing at this game of weight loss through restriction and deprivation and punishing exercise. Maybe you aren't failing. Maybe the entire premise that you are operating on is failing you. Okay? So maintenance is a huge myth. Maintenance is such a big myth in this game because it's like we just believe that if we worked hard enough to get there, that we could just then relax and sit back and it would be easy. But the fact of the matter is, if it takes misery to get there, it will take misery to stay there. Whatever misery it takes to get there, it will take to stay there. If you can adopt a new healthy lifestyle and it feels, like I said at the beginning, if it feels energizing and enjoyable and flexible and sustainable, and it fits with your values and your lifestyle, and you can take it on holiday, and it can survive it can survive vacations and Christmas and birthdays, and your weight shifts down. Perfect. Great. But if you are on an inflexible plan that makes you feel insane while you are doing it in order to get down to whatever that number is that you think that you should know and be able to predict, you're going to have to stay in that same insane place to stay there. That's what we see over and over again. That's what I mean when I say diets don't work. Not that you can't short-term manipulate your weight through extreme measures. Sure. And again, this isn't even true for all people. Some people can't. Some people are doing everything they can possibly think of and still not seeing results. But some people can. But the whole thing is that if you can't maintain it, if you're not happy to live in that place long term, it's going to fall apart, right? That's what we see over and over and over again. And not only that, but it tends to push our weight up. Not good. So the fifth one I want to talk about today, and again, this is, definitely not an exhaustive list. These are just sort of foundational ones that I think really touch on, how I work differently, and how I want to push women to actually ask questions about things that we just take for granted, that we just accept as true all the time, that our medical community tells us is true, that even the alternative health holistic world tells us is true. Like sacrifice all of your mental, emotional health to look this way physically. That's not holistic. Holistic means that your mental, emotional self is cared for as well as your physical self, right? And if you need to be in a place where you're obsessively planning and feeling guilty and, feeling negative about the foods you eat and never getting it right in order to be a certain size, that's not holistic. It's not holistic health, right? So the fifth myth is that if you give up on this game, how do I want to say it? If you are not actively trying to maintain or lose weight via restricting or controlling your food and exercise, that you've given up. That's a myth. So many women feel, but what then? If I stop using food and exercise to control my weight or to try and get my weight down, I'm just giving up. What I would like to propose is that you're not actually giving up. You're actually just moving on. You are growing up. You are seeing how the cultural storyline about how we understand our bodies, how we feel about our bodies, how we treat our bodies is not only not working, 95% fail rate. Not only is it not working, but it's actually harming us. The yo-yoing is proving in research to be more damaging to our health than extra weight ever will be. Okay? It is harming our health. It is making us mentally and emotionally exhausted. We feel terrible about ourselves. We end up in negative thought patterns and behaviors around food that actually encourages us to self-sabotage. And to me, that's almost a joke now when women say, why am I self-sabotaging? You're not self-sabotaging. You're trying to buy into the rules of a culture that is sabotaging you. You're not self-sabotaging, You're just trying to adhere to something that's not working, and it isn't working for most women in our culture. And so, deciding to get off this hamster wheel is not about giving up. It's about realizing that what you have been taught to do is not working, and that there is a more peaceful, easeful, abundant way to start approaching our health and our bodies that feels good. Not just when we get there, but all the way along. It's like realizing we are there. You are in your body right now, and you can be your healthiest, best self in whatever body you're in. And then we'll just see what happens. We'll just see where things go. My feet are falling asleep. They're under me. The Food Freedom Body Love Method program is for women who are ready to break the cycles of restricting and controlling food and feeling kind of insane and crazy while they're trying to do that, and then everything falling apart and feeling a whole new level of insane and crazy when that happens. It's about women who are ready to break the cycles of hating their bodies and hating on their bodies and feeling like their bodies are broken and their bodies don't work, when actually your body is working perfectly. Most of the negative reactions we have in our thoughts and in our weight is our body trying to save us from ourselves. So the Food Freedom Body Love method is about learning to work with our body, to stop fighting food, to stop fighting our body, and to start working with our body. You know, the program is for women who want to break that habit, and in order to break it, you have to have a pretty deep desire to change, because our culture is going to keep feeding you the same storyline over and over and over. Like, it's not changing anytime soon. I wish it were. I don't see that happening in the next, 10 years. We'll see. 20 years, who knows? You need to have a deep desire. And, often that desire comes from either just being so fed up and tired and exhausted that you're just like, I'm in so much pain. I just can't keep doing this. I cannot keep doing this. But the desire can also come from just feeling like you want to live differently. That you don't want to be in obsessive, reactive cycles with food in your body constantly. There are plenty of women that come into the program who, aren't at rock bottom or aren't in a super terrible place, but who just know that there's something more, that they want to use their brains for something more over the course of the day than, obsessing about how much kale they ate. There's just a desire that can come from wanting to live a more whole, really abundant life in the body that you have now, in your best, healthiest body. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to leave it at that for today. I will say that for those who are interested in doing something that's more interactive, Tina, hi Tina. Zumba is the only time you like exercise. I love Zumba. Dance is like I found dance as like an adult, and I love it. I do modern contemporary dance every week. It is like joy. It's just joy to me. And I found it, in my 30s. And yeah, I think exercise is all about, movement should be about joy. You should be excited to do it. You should enjoy doing it, and you should feel good after. That's the way I look at movement. So for those who are interested, program starts on October 2nd here in Kingston. If you're not here, I do one-on-ones all the time. If you want to do more of a Q&A, I do them in the Find Food Freedom and Love Your Body private Facebook group. I'm going to be getting back on track with those. And I do plan to do weekly Facebook lives here on the open public biz page as well, so we can dig a little bit deeper into some of these ideas and concepts. So feel free anytime to also just shoot me a message, leave questions, things you want me to talk more about or expand on, things that you don't get, that you're like, I don't really understand this, or this doesn't make sense to me, and hopefully I can dig into that. So that's it. Have an amazing day. Have a great Monday. And there's lots more to talk about. Thanks for being here, Melissa. Thanks, Alicia. Take care of you guys.